This is an in-camera multiple exposure. I created it with the Canon 5D Mark III, which I love. It's an in-camera feature called multiple exposures. A lot of people with Nikon lenses have cameras rather have had that. I haven't. So finally they came out with that, and I've been able to do it. How did I create this? Well, I have a whole segment towards the middle of the program where I go into that. So I will let Artie start talking.
I did some blurs with film. Anyone here used to use film? I couldn't believe there's still people downstairs online at the film department. You know, at one point I said, oh, I'll be the last one using film. I'll be the last one to switch to digital. But fortunately, I came to my senses very soon thereafter. And I love digital. I wish I never heard the word film. I wish digital had been around forever. So I used to do some blurs with film, but the problem is, towards the end of my career, every time you push the button was about 46 cents. So one of the things we encourage folks to do with digital is, once you're set up with a good blur situation, is to take lots of pictures. And sometimes we might take 50 or 100 images in a given situation. So the last thing I'd want to do, God forgive me for saying it here, but I'm Jewish, 46 cents a pop. You really, God forgive me, you want to stay away from that. But here we're out at Nickerson Beach. Who knows what's going to be with Hurricane Sandy for next year for the breeding birds. That there's a wonderful breeding colony out there of skimmers, common terns, and then a bunch of piping plovers, American oystercatcher. And
whoops, shall we go back?
He
said he's yakking too much. Eyes.
And the old advice with film used to be for blurs, work at a 15th of a second and pan with the animals, pan with the birds. And that's still good advice today. As soon as you go to digital, however, you can be free to experiment much more with much wider range of shutter speeds. I've done animals at down to a quarter. Denise is doing some crazy stuff out of 1 or 2 seconds even. And certainly digital has freed us up to experiment.
That's true. Go ahead.
Denise is big on moving the lens for flower pictures, and you'll see lots of lots of examples of that. She does shivers and flames and pan blurs. With the birds, I'm generally panning with the animal, although there are exceptions to that. If everything's equal, the faster the animal's going, the more the effective blur will be. And one thing that a lot of folks don't realize is the distance to the subject has a tremendous influence on the degree of blurring. If you have a snow goose flying by you 30 feet away and you photograph it at a 30th of a second, if you're lucky, the best you're going to get is some surreal angel blur. It's going to be really wild looking, but most times you're just going to get mush that you're going to delete instantly. On the other hand, if you have a flock of snow geese 400 yards away and you're at a 30th of a second, same shutter speed, they're going to be rendered relatively sharp, sometimes even close to being razor sharp. So the distance to the subject. So if you're going to do a bird that's flying by close, you might work at 1/125th, 1/250th even, and get some nice blurring when the animals are close. Obviously the shutter speed, the slower the shutter speed in a given situation, the more blur there's going to be. We'll see a few examples where I'll use a 3-stop neutral density or a warming polarizer set to dark. When it's sunny, the best you can do with ISO 50 even is about a 30th of a second. And oftentimes we want to get much slower than that. So I actually have a 3-stop for my big Canon lenses for the drop-in filter. When I first started photographing, I didn't even know there was such a thing. I know this lens has one. Or am I nuts? You know what? I think I'm nuts. Oh, here it is, right in front of my nose. Yeah, as a matter of fact, the people in the front can tell us this needs to badly to be cleaned.
Yeah, but it does what it's supposed to.
Matter of fact, the first time somebody even told me that there was a drop-in filter on my big lenses, we took it out and it looked like it had spent some time in the cat litter box. So, and it will mess up autofocus. But what you do is you buy a spare filter holder, and then you get a 52 millimeter slim 0.9 ND. B&H used to carry a great one by, I think by B&W. That's discontinued now. They have one by Hoy, and that's all, information's all on the blog. As far as the way the subject's going, in general, when we think of pan blurs, we have the bird flying from side to side or the animal running from side to side, and that will accentuate the blur. When the animals are coming towards you or flying towards you, the degree of blurring is less.
Okay, camera movement. I use a technique I like to call shivering. What is shivering? It's basically just shivering. So it's a small little movement. When I first started experimenting, I was doing these wild shakes, you know. There was nobody out there sharing their information, so I had no idea how much do you move the camera, how, you know, am I going like this? And I did everything. But I found that if I want an impressionistic look, just a shiver. So it's basically a slow shutter speed and just a shiver. Well, your shutter speed, you would want it to range between a 30th of a second and lower. It could go down to a 1/4 of a second. You could go even lower. The slower your shutter speed, the less you need to move. So, and it depends. If I'm out in the middle of the day, I have my 100 millimeter macro lens attached to my camera, and sometimes it's sunny, I can shade the flowers that I'm working on with my body. So that can also help me get a slower shutter speed.
One thing we should have mentioned at the outset, if you have questions, just scream them out.
Yeah, just go ahead and.
Is there a better way to get the pan going from your left to the right, or the other way, or doesn't it matter?
To me, that never matters.
Well, I think it would be whatever you're comfortable with. I mean, some people, for me, it would be awkward going this way, where I could go left to right very easily. So it would be whatever you're comfortable with. But the most important thing is to pan at the same rate as your subject, or if you'd like your subject to be more blurred, you know, differently. It's really just, you know, how much you're moving it. And sometimes I found with small flowers like forget-me-nots or lobelia, if I go in a small little tiny circular motion, I can emulate the shape of the flower. So it's, you know, yeah, it's really, everything about this is experimenting. I'm still experimenting. Yes?
When you do the multiple exposures within your camera, because I have that capability,
Okay.
I used to, when I hit film, had to make adjustments
On the exposure?
on the exposure. Do you have to do that?
In the Canon 5D Mark III, you can choose if you want to do additive, average, and then they have two others that are like, I think like dark and bright. I use average, and then it'll keep my exposure the same throughout, so I don't have to worry about that.
That's what I was wondering. I have Nikon.
Oh, okay,
Same thing.
yeah. And so a group of flowers, the same, you know, moving my camera. Now I'm at Bosque del Apache. I'm on a tripod with a 500 millimeter lens, and everybody's watching me. It's on a tripod, and I'm still shaking it. And I'm taking multiple pictures because I wanted this kind of a look. So if you want to look like that, similar to that, that's all you really need to do, a slight shiver. And I'm at about a 20th of a second here.
So you have your ball head loose so you can do that shiver?
No, no, no. No, Michelle. The whole thing is, yeah, you can either hand hold it or have it on a tripod, and I'm moving it just slightly, and the tripod is barely moving because I'm barely moving it. Okay, it's just a little, yeah, so it wouldn't matter.
We're using mongoose heads with the big lenses, mongoose 3.6, and even if you have a Wimberley, and to me they're both equal, just the mongoose is lighter. Even if, I've had this argument with David and Clay Wimberley for years, even if you lock that thing up with a wrench as tight as you can, there's still a tremendous amount of play. And then you can even experiment with turning IS on or turning it off.
It hasn't affected my images either way. I've experimented back and forth with them, and I've taken pictures hoping to see a difference, and I haven't. So
There's one main problem when you turn IS off.
forget to turn it on. Yeah. Okay, so Phragmites at Bosque dell'Apache, and just again, same little movement. That's one of Artie's.
This is mine. It was thank you. At Venice Rookery, they took down, oh man, a big stand of Australian pines. That was a beautiful background that made morning photography there really good. They took them out in an effort to get rid of non-native vegetation. And now it's actually pretty cool to go there in the evening. So we go there in the late afternoon, and because we love the process of photography so much, we'll stay out till after dark. So a lot of times blurs and the inspiration for blurs, if you will, come out of necessity. When it's so dark that you'd have to be at ISO 25,800, whatever, to even get close to make a sharp picture, why not go to ISO 50 or 100 and make blurs? So in this case, the bird was displaying, and I was taking a bunch, and I was trying to rely on the movement of the bird, and I wasn't that happy. So I decided that when he displayed, I was just going to kick my tripod. Like we said, experiment.
Okay, so I have a group out at Longwood Gardens, and they're going to take pictures of tulips, but now they all want to learn how to do blurs. Okay, what do I do? Fill up your frame with the tulips. That was my first instruction. The next instruction was the tulips have a little zigzag top. Let's follow that line. So let's move our cameras, hand-holding, we were hand-holding, in a zigzag motion. And I got that shot and I said, bingo, this is what we want. Everybody looked at the back of my camera and everybody in the group ended up getting one. So it's a matter of, did I know exactly what we were going to do as soon as we got out there? No. I looked behind the camera, I saw the flowers, and it just, occurred to me, a zigzag.
Before you go on, what's your favorite macro lens?
100 millimeter macro lens. I don't use the image stabilization one. I have the oldie, the old school one. But I don't need it for my type of photography. I usually shoot wide open at close distance. So, and with the blurs, again, the image stabilization, I haven't noticed it being something that I need or don't need. So, yes.
So with most of them, you've taken them with your macro lens.
Yes.
At a low shutter speed.
Yes.
Basically.
Yes.
So you want to get as low as you can to get it,
Well,
or not necessarily. So you're at your lowest ISO
is 50.
and 50, and you're just playing with the time.
Yeah, and it depends on what time of day I'm out there. Like Artie
Right,
said, it's
right.
really, one of the things that, I try to tell people is go with the flow, what's going on. If you have, really good light for flight photography, and the wind is good, you should be shooting flight photography. If it's not, find something else. If you have low light, blurs are a perfect thing to do. I'm sitting around at the beach and I'm waiting for birds to show up. I turn my camera onto blur mode, which is a nice feature now with the 5D Mark III. You can set your custom thing up at the top, that little...
C1, C2, and C3.
Yeah, and so you can switch it to blur mode quickly, and then if you need to, go right back to whatever you were doing. Yes, sir?
When you see something that makes you want to not go with the flow, for instance, the lighting is wrong, would you throw something like a neutral density filter on or something?
You could, or you could, for me, if I'm using a 100 millimeter macro, chances are I can cover, I can shade the subject with my body. So that's one of the reasons I do love the 100 millimeter macro. It allows me to get in close. I can use my body when I have to. So if it's out in the middle of the day and it's bright, I can, get what I need. Adjusting your aperture, I hate to stop down because then you get the dust bunny. So using a filter like Artie suggests is a great idea. And his images from Bosque, I'm sure you'll see some later with the warming polarizer. I'm definitely buying one now.
Yeah, you were a tiny bit late, so we were talking. I use a 0.9 3-stop drop-in for the big telephoto lenses, and then for my 77 millimeter stuff, like a 70 to 200, 100 to 400, I use a 77 millimeter warming polarizer. And what you do with that is, my favorite rule for bird photography is point your shadow at the bird. So if the sun is behind me, generally I'm going to photograph my birds between here and here. And what you do with the circular polarizer is you put it on the front of the lens, 77 millimeter, and then you turn 90 degrees to the sun. And you can be in any mode, doesn't matter even if you're in manual or AV. Then you start turning the circular polarizer until you get the slowest shutter speed. or the most minus if you're working in manual mode. And that's what's called setting it to dark. And that's also a great tip if you happen to have it on your lens when you're trying to do a rainbow, is set your circular polarizer to dark. Then I'll turn around back to sun angle, and at ISO 50 we can get down to sometimes an eighth, a tenth, certainly a 13th of a second, even in bright sun. And then the warming part of the polarizer, I think it's a Hoya filter, it's on our blog. The warming part is amazing. You take pictures at 10:30 in bright sun, and it looks like they're taken at 7:30 in the morning.
Yeah, I really like that.
And yes, one thing that Denise, to pick up on that, the last thing you want to do, let's say, oh, you don't have something to cut the light, either a neutral density or a polarizer, and you're forced to work at a 30th at f32. That's really good if you like to spend about an hour and a half on each picture cleaning microscopic dust bunnies, and you will get them. So just having that 3-stop and getting, say, to f11, you cut that work drastically. Yeah. Yes?
Do with your warming filter in emergency, you can't just adjust your white balance a little bit to get the same effect.
It's digital. You do whatever you want to do. You know, I don't mess around much with white balance. I do something called average blur white balance, where I duplicate the picture and I go, what is it, filter, blur, average. That turns the picture to one solid color. Then I go back to the original picture, open up a curves adjustment layer, click on the middle tone dropper, and go back and click on the average blur picture. You with us? And then what happens is it'll spread the curve. Now about 30% of the time it'll work perfectly, and the new color will be just fantastic. About 40% of the time you'll do it and it'll be an improvement where you'll change the opacity and wind up with something much better than what you started with. And then 30% of the time you'll click on the eyedropper, you click on the middle eyedropper and curves, then you click on the average blur copy, and you'll say to yourself, who invented that? And make the picture look horrible, too magenta. But it's certainly a tool that I use often, even before I'll do white balance. And if you're going to do white balance, of course, you want to do it on the raw.
Okay, so for this one, instead of doing a full vertical pan blur, I'm doing a slight vertical pan blur. And a slight is this, that little bit.
Wow.
So it just softens the flowers, but it's very small, just a little bit. So it's not a lot. And same kind of idea here. So I like the
pictures look
tulips.
way better up there.
Yeah, they really do.
Can you replicate some of the effect post-production?
You can, yes, you can. In post-processing in Photoshop, you could duplicate your layer, lower the opacity of the one layer, use the transform tool and move it, or just the V tool and move it. And with a layer mask, you know, fix up the edges and stuff. If you're going to try to do something like that, I would suggest making sure you had enough background to work with so that you can clean up the edges nicely. But it's much nicer, more fun to do it in camera. Sunflowers, same thing. Now I'm doing this a bit wider, and I'm playing around, you know. So I'm moving.
Come stand in the light.
I don't want to stand in the light. Instead of going in a shivering mode, I'm just doing this, little like bouncy. So.
Sometimes we put on music for her.
Stop. So I'm at the sunflower field in Sparta, New Jersey, where I run workshops, and I was imagining these sunflowers, how they would look with the wind blowing and everything, and well, the wind wasn't blowing, so I decided to make it blow. So if you look at the picture carefully, you can see these little lines. That tells you how I moved my camera. They're telltale signs, so if you see those little lines, then you can pick up from another image, ooh, that's how they made that. So I learned that. It took me a while to learn that. But
So what's the shutter speed on this? The slowest?
this is about an eighth of a second.
And how far away are you from the?
Well, I'm about to the wall. I'm really not that far away. And I was probably, I don't even know what lens I was using.
Macro.
Mm,
100 to 400 maybe.
maybe the 100 to 400. So this is from Longwood Gardens, and I've got a bunch of clients, and we're trying to take some pictures of these daisies, and then somebody opens the side door, and all the daisies are moving around. And they said, okay, well, we can't shoot now. And then they started making this big wind wall. And I said, move the wind wall. Let's change what we're doing. It's going with the flow, and let's work with what we have. So as the wind was blowing, we were taking pictures, so, you know. Pan blurs. Okay, to create a vertical pan blur, one of the best tips that I can give you is mount it on a tripod, your camera on a tripod, lock the sides so that it doesn't go side to side and you can only go up and down. So now you're going up and down in a nice fluid movement. And that was from the Grand Tetons when Artie and I were there. This same kind of idea, except for now I'm hand holding and my movement isn't as fluid, so you can see the difference. And some heather, same thing, hand holding. That's Artie's.
This is one of mine. I don't do as many flowers as Denise, of course, since I'm concentrating on birds. But we were at Chanticleer Gardens, and it was just beautiful light in the late afternoon. And I had gotten my 180 macro out of mothballs for the trip, and on a mongoose head, and again locking the horizontal pan, and then just slow shutter speed, probably about 1/8, and then keeping the vertical pan loose, and just choo, choo, choo. And again, to beat a dead horse. Once you're there and you have a nice situation, and I knew I loved this situation, you want to take a lot of photographs with blurs. I mean, you know, digital is free, right? All you need is $7,000 camera, $4,000 laptop, a couple of $1,000s worth of software,
Yeah.
a couple of $1,000s worth of cards. And the best thing that I love about digital photography being free is that after you buy that camera for $7,000 or $8,000, then in 2 years you can get at least $2,000 for it. I mean, they're like obsolete after 15 minutes, although my 1DX I'm loving. And with this exact background, this gray mat here, this hangs in my daughter's living room about 60 inches wide. And everybody who walks in goes, oh my God, who painted that? So thank you, Denise. Yes?
I'm not sure how to phrase this, but we know in composition, your eye normally lands on something sharp. These all work. They're beautiful. But how do you know which ones work?
That's a great question. There's a fine line between a blurry picture and a pleasingly blurred picture. Sometimes if the whole image is a blurred image and it's not blurry enough, it'll hurt your eye. So you that's all about experimenting, you know? You take a few shots and you're not sure, take a few more, adjust your shutter speed. But when you're out there in the field and you take a few and you look at the back of your camera, you're only getting an idea of what's going to end up happening when you get home, because everybody knows that. When you put it up on the screen, as soon as you see it, you'll know if it's a good one. I mean, it's almost like instantaneously. But if you shoot blurs, expect that you'll shoot 100 and maybe you get 1 or 2 keepers. So, you know, yeah. The keeper rate's really low. It's worth trying.
I want to go address the same question in depth. Number one, if you have 20 on the back of the camera that look great on the back of the camera, you might have 1 or 2 that you like. Blurs always look great on the back of the camera for whatever reason. Second thing, and this is what people forget often, every factor that makes a good natural history photograph of a sharp subject has to apply to blurs. So number one, with rare exception, well, I can say pretty much that every photograph that you've seen so far, and at least 99% of the ones you're going to see for the rest, I can think of one that's not. They're all accurately focused. When you make a pleasing blur, you're not trying to make an image that's not focused correctly. So that's the first thing. If you're doing a bird, you want to have a good head angle. If the bird is in the frame or the flower, you want to have a composition that would be pleasing to the eye if it were a sharp image. sometimes Denise is moderator or co-moderator on birdphotographers.net in a forum called Out of the Box, where people are encouraged to think out of the box both in the field by doing weird stuff or in post-processing, and Denise is a master of that also. And a lot of times they'll post a picture and they'll say, well, the bird has a bad head angle, or you cut off part of the bush on the right. And they'll go, but it's a blur, it's out of the box. And I go, it doesn't matter. The principles for making good pictures have to apply, and that's your starting point. And then we get this question so often. We do a lot of critiquing on workshops where a lot of times I'll put my pictures up at Bosque. Took 200 blurs in the morning, and we're clicking through and I'm going garbage, 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 garbage. And then all of a sudden one picture comes up and every single person goes, whoa, that's a good blur. So can you teach that? I don't know. It's the same thing with trying to teach creative vision. Look at a million good pictures. There's so many good sites online. Buy good photography books. Look at great photography. And then when that really good picture comes along, you too will be going, whoa, that's really cool.
Yeah, and experiment, you know. You've got the camera, experiment. Take lots and lots of pictures until you feel really comfortable doing it.
Two things. We're both working in manual mode most of the time, but not all. Secondly, when I'm making a picture like this, the most important factor for me is the composition. And what determines the composition is when I push the shutter button in relation to the camera moving. So I might be taking 50 of these, trying to get all the tops of the flowers set against green. You know, now there might be another image here that you might personally like better, where we have total color streaks from top to bottom. So that's what I'm basically trying to do, is get the timing right. Click, click.
I'm always varying my shutter speed. If I'm looking at a flock of birds that are going, not only am I adjusting my shutter speed to adjust the amount of blur, I'm also, you know, keep in mind you're always making sure your exposure is correct. But I'm also adjusting how much I pan with them or not with them, how much I move, how much I don't move. So, you know, all those things, you know, really do change things. So I'm always experimenting. Even this last year, I'm at Bosque a couple of months ago, and the workshop clients, well, what are you shooting at? It's changing every 5 seconds. I'm in manual mode, and I'm moving everything around, and just to experiment. I'm still experimenting. That's what I love about blurs. Every day is an experiment. You never know, you'll come up with something really different. But just knowing the principles, and they're all outlined in the Guide to Pleasing Blurs, so that you have a really good starting point, so when you go out into the field, you have an idea. But even if you have the idea, you still want to experiment. Those birds are flying around. You know, pan with them, don't pan with them. Change it up, because you never know. Anybody else? Yes. Yes, we're showing zoom blurs if we ever get going.
Oh, that's mine.
Yeah, that's yours. Doing it.
Oh, wow.
I love that.
Yeah, that's fireweed up in Alaska on a bear boat trip, and there were no bears. And the next one?
Well, you know what? This one really shows a good example. Artie really likes a clean edge, lower edge or top edge. So this is a good example of making sure you have a nice clean edge, because that really enhances the blurs. You'll notice some of them that have that, and it really stands out. Not all of them, but some of them.
This is also Katmai National Park. This is with the
Cool?
800 lens.
I love
It's
that one.
a 1/8 of a second pan blur. And we just did a seminar in New York City past weekend. There were a few folks who were with us there, at least 3. And one of the things we talk about is developing your creative vision. And one of the messages that I try to get across is, hey, you go for a walk, whether you're walking on 34th Street, or you're out at Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge, or you're in Florida, or you're in the Southern Oceans in South Georgia. Wherever you are, the process is the same. You go out there and you're looking around, and all of a sudden you see something that catches your eye. It might be color, it might be texture, it might be form, it might be a great bird, it might be beautiful light, And then you put your thinking cap on, you go, okay, I got 4 lenses with me. Which one is going to let me best get this idea onto a digital sensor so I can share it with other people? So here we are looking around, and you know, the action with the eagles is usually fantastic, but there was a little lull. It was late in the afternoon, and I looked far away and I saw this beautiful stand of trees with the white trunks, and they were all dead. And then by asking questions, I learned that this stand of trees, this picture is about 2 years old, they were killed by saltwater intrusion or whatever in the 1968 earthquake. And here were these skeletons 50 years old of the trees. So I just took the 800 at 1/8 of a second, locked the horizontal, and just made a whole bunch. And again, it's that same principle of getting a clean lower edge and a little more room at the top. So it might take 40 or 50 attempts, because believe me, on half of them I'm going to cut the tops of the trees off, and half of them the shoreline's going to be in the middle. So I just, you know, take a bunch and then go through them. Oh, that one looks pretty good, and then keep going.
Do you take a straight picture just for a reference point?
It's a good idea for teaching, but rarely.
So immediately you see this scene and you know you're going to make it a blur.
I didn't take one sharp one of those.
And this actually, on the laptop, looks like feathers. It's an amazing image. I love it. I would have this.
Thank you. I even like this one.
Yeah, really love this.
What's the shutter speed here? Do you have any?
1/8.
Is that pretty common for?
Pretty common.
I mean, in general, our blurs are going to be anywhere from 1/4 to a 15th to a 30th. And then if we're dealing with animals running, you can get some nice blurs at a little, you were also late coming in, with a little faster shutter speed. As the animals are closer to you, you'll get a much greater degree of blurring at relatively high shutter speeds. So you don't want to shoot a bird flying 30 feet away at 1/4. You're just going to get absolute mush, period.
I think I checked my exif after a big day of shooting, and it ranged from an 1/8, a 15th, and a 25th. Those were the 3 I hit the most. So that helps.
And a
me.
10th and a 13th and all
Yeah,
the
there's a
stuff
lot
in
in
between.
between, but those were the ones I actually did hit a lot.
Oh, this one I'm so proud of. Go ahead, question first.
Do you, like on the last one, do you do top down and then bottom up sometimes?
My habit is to always go down. And then for zoom blurs that we see later, I always go from long to short. But that's personal
I
preference.
go bottom to top.
It's obvious that she's wrong, though.
I don't know.
This one I'm so proud of for a bunch of reasons. It's fall color. It's a technique that Denise taught me, and she's already taught you, and that's the flame.
Well, I haven't actually covered.
Did you talk?
Not yet. You're doing it.
She's coming to the flame. It's her flame jiggle, where you try to go like this as you're doing a vertical pan
On
blur.
a diagonal.
On the diagonal.
The
And
diagonal works good.
the 2 reasons I'm proud of this, it was a finalist in last year's BBC Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition. But the thing that makes it more amazing, you think of fall color. It's going, oh, he must have been up in the Canadian woods, or he must have been upstate New York or Maine or the White Mountains of New Hampshire. I live in Central Florida. I went to take out the garbage in January, and we have 1 maple tree. And I said, oh man, fall color in Florida. So I ran back in and got my 70-200 and started doing some flame blurs.
Lilacs from my yard. Oh, go ahead.
Did you use a tripod?
No tripod for that.
Same for
It-
me on the lilacs.
I
and
think
both.
for a flame blur, it's really hard to use a tripod
is.
because you can't get the...
You need to, so how much of a diagonal? It can be a full diagonal like you just saw, or a little bit less of a diagonal. It could just be straight up. But hand holding this is pretty much a given, because you have to kind of do a little twist. Kind of think of a flame. Try to move your hands in a flame. So, yeah. And that is just a shrub from my house. I was just experimenting for my, I think for the guide to put it in. Hydrangeas from a nursery. They were so ratty looking. That's another thing. If you have
Another
flowers,
motivation.
yeah, if you have flowers that are spotted and they're just not pristine, and you just don't want to take a great, close-up of them because it's going to show every little thing, try a blur, because you see the browns in there, those were spots. Those were dead spots in the flowers, and they actually added to a more Victorian look to that, I thought. This is from Bosky. One of our clients, Gaurav Mittal, who is now going to be one of the contributors for the mini mag, he was experimenting with blurs and having so much fun, and he was so excited. He said, "Denise, come look at the back of my camera, I got one." And I looked at the back of his camera, it looked very close to that, and I said, "Oh my God, where did you get that?" I turned to my left, I didn't even see it. The salt cedar with the light behind it was amazing. And I took only three shots, and all three I kept. So it was a great opportunity.
That's
and
stunningly beautiful. I saw that one. I
the
said, oh my God.
texture was just so nice, and I have Gaurav to thank for that. And so he was inspired by our blurs. He had never taken them. He's another converted person.
We have lots of clients who come along, and when we stop, if there's not that much action, we go, we're going to do blurs, and they go like,
yeah, they don't know what you're going to do.
And then after 10 minutes, oh, look at this one. And then Clemens van der Werf, who's traveled with me a whole bunch over the past 2 years, he used to photograph his dogs and sailboats, and now he loves nature. He's been with me a zillion times. He won a big prize in a major bird photography contest for a blur of a great blue heron leg. It's just the leg with the wave going by at a 15th. And it's a beautiful picture in black and white. So be careful. If you get started, it can be addictive.
At Bosky, we had the sunrise and we had the beautiful red. Oh, and I thought, gosh, that's so beautiful with the branches in front of it, and what can I do? And right away I said, oh, I'm doing one of my little flames. So, and I played around with this. I must have taken 15 shots before I got a couple, and we were leaving, and I was so mad I didn't want to leave because I think I was the only one shooting these things. So I didn't want to leave. Everybody else was like, okay, let's go, the birds are gone. And I'm like, no, wait. So here's another example of a palm frond that had a lot of little yellow spots. So those yellow spots are now just smoothed out, and they look like part of the plant. And it's really just the dead marginata. And the background is, those are river rocks, you can't tell, and that's just a vertical pan blur. And I tried to go a little bit on the side, so I worked really hard to get that one, because, well, yeah, I don't know, I think that was a little bit of luck. I was doing a vertical pan blur, and I was trying to go with the flame, but I was trying to get it from the corner, and so I just kept playing with it, and I just got that. I don't know how. Very lucky. The grass from my front yard, I just laid down, belly down. There was nothing to shoot, nothing. I had already shot every single thing in my yard. I laid down, used my elbows as a tripod, and kind of just went on the side. I was trying to create just and because I was hand holding, I guess I didn't do a good job. I wanted a diagonal pan blur to be perfectly straight, and I ended up getting this, and I like this just as much. So. And with a 500mm lens at Barnegat Jetty, just the grass was blowing in front of the water, and I just thought that looked real pretty. So. And with a 100mm macro on a tulip, going in really close, and just a very slow movement, and that just softened everything up. That's Artie's.
This is sunrise at the Cave Store in La Jolla, which is a famous pelican spot. So we got there early, and I noticed some pink purple in the sky reflecting in the water. Probably a 600 lens with a teleconverter, 1/15 of a second, and then turn the lens in the mount to diagonal, and then just pan. And the nice part is I'm standing there and have a group of about 8 or 10 photographers, and I make this picture, and then I put it on the back of the camera, and I show everybody, and they go, oh my God, where'd you get that? It's just the water.
At Bosky, this is a Russian olive tree. The naturalist that was with us said it was so ratty looking, oh my gosh. And the color, those colors together just reminded me, I don't know, of earth and neutrals. And So I went ahead and did a pan blur, and I loved it. And I've never seen a Russian olive. Just some dead trees at Bosque. Here's an example showing one of my clients, what should we photograph? There's nothing here. Well, there's lots here. There's lots here. Dead trees, they make a good subject, so.
Soup from a stone.
A reflection in one of the crane pools. And the teasel looked really nice, but you know, I was experimenting. So I went ahead and took the straight shot, and then I did a blur. And this reminds me of wallpaper. I thought this looked like wallpaper, but I could see this being sheets. I would love to have my sheets look like that. That's Artie's.
Here I am on South Plaza Island in the Galapagos, and I forget the name of the plant, but it's red 12 months a year. And I'm doing pan blurs, and again, you see I have a penchant for liking a strip of stuff at the top, especially. So that's the water, and then there was this big green bush. So now I'm doing a horizontal pan blur, but it's the same as with all the trees and flowers, where it's the timing. I want to get this green bush in the rule of thirds spots. So that takes a bunch of tries. And one thing I should mention is that I use rear focus all the time. So my camera's always in AI servo. So for a shot like this, once I focus on the green bush and I'm on a tripod, I don't have to worry about focusing anymore. I don't have to worry about holding the shutter button down. And took a whole bunch.
This one is killer.
Thank you. Yeah, this one I entered in BBC last year, and it didn't even make the finals. I thought it would. It's a 1/4 second blur, and we had the group, and they had a new tour loop road, a temporary tour loop road. And we went in the back, and I say it often, and people think it's bull, but I guess it depends what you believe. I was at Bosque dell'Apache with my late wife for like 15 minutes one year when we returned from one of our sabbaticals the year before she passed away. And I swear that she's there pulling strings on some mornings, because I got the group out. I said, oh my God, there's a huge flock, but they're really far away. So get your longest lens and put a teleconverter on and get a slow shutter speed. And we just no sooner got everybody set up. I said, okay, is everybody ready? And I said, okay, Elaine, do your thing. Huge blast off, 1/4 second. And of course, taking advantage of the cottonwoods in the background.
Yeah, and one of the important things for this is that Artie says it a million times if you're at one of his IPTs, the best time to make your picture is in like the first 30 seconds. As soon as they
First 30 seconds. When there's a blast off, the best pictures are in the first 3 seconds.
Yeah.
After 3 seconds, the birds are spreading apart. And again, to beat the dead horse, the clean lower edge.
Yeah.
Now, can I have the clicker for a little while?
Yeah, you can have the clicker.
Thank you. Woo. We're up in Homer, and I'm panning a little bit up as this young bald eagle takes off. We're baiting them, we're feeding them. And the trick to getting a sharp eye is to be young. Because what you need to do is be able to match the speed and direction of the bird with your pan. And that's gotten harder and harder for me to do over time. I actually have a nice one in this afternoon's program of a sandhill crane. So it's a 30th of a second. Focus, rear focus for this is push the button and hold it, pan with the bird, and take a lot of pictures. This one actually made the finals of BBC, the two-headed eagle blur. I think this is an 8th. And I love the watercolor. Yeah. And it's a pan blur, so as I'm following the bird, giving us a relatively sharp head as he's going for the fish, and of course the part with the talons up in the air is really cool. But again, it's a matter of experimenting and taking lots of pictures. And you know, this was a situation where we thought blurs out of necessity. Do we really want to go to ISO 10,000? I mean, with the 1DX you can make some decent pictures, but how much more fun to just go to ISO 50? And one thing I wanted to mention before, we love photography so much and we're so crazy about being out there. We'll be out there in the near dark. So there are times where we have to go to ISO 800 to get an 1/8 of a second.
Yeah.
So you don't want to blindly say, well, I'll be at a ISO 50. And these are pretty much in the dime a dozen category. When you're feeding them, we get a boat, and the most we spent in 3 weeks was $4,000 on herring. And a baby skimmer, this is with the 800 at Nickerson Beach. Again, same formula, panning, focus. Here I'm going to be picking a focusing sensor. This is probably the Mark IV. They have a middle, and then you can pick two on the bottom row to try to get accurate focus on the bird's face. And this is an old one with the 600 and the 2X actually focusing manually, knowing that accurate focus wouldn't be critical. And that's at a spot in Bosque del Apache where this year they chose, for political and practical reasons, not to put water in North Railroad Pond. So this site was closed. So we're going to try to work with the new refuge manager and get some water in there next year, and maybe raise some funds to get a deck built. There are some safety issues with that. Some lady once, I won't say what color hair she had, but she went for a walk on the railroad tracks, and she was so enthralled with her surroundings that one of those maintenance cars came along with railroad wheels on the thing going like 60 miles an hour, and the guy had to screech on his brake to avoid killing her because she was just oblivious. So they laid down the law and kept us out of there now for 2 years.
Okay, this one shows I'm panning very fast. The bird's moving fast and I'm panning fast, and you can see that from the background, the lines. Next one. Little Estero Beach in Florida. You know, I already took 100 of these as straight shots and then decided, you know, let me change it up a little. I mean, how many pictures do you need of the bird coming in? So that's when I decided, let me try it with a blur. Very difficult to do to get it all in the frame, you know. It's easier, it seems, when they're not a blur, because you know.
And to get the eye relatively sharp.
Do you use live view or the light for the...
I never use live view. I'm always on center point focus in manual mode. With my 100mm macro, I'm always manually focusing also. I don't think that lens has ever seen autofocus. No. Subject movement. These trees are from Yellowstone and Grand Teton area. And letting your subject do the movement. The wind's blowing. Again, it goes back to going with the flow. The wind's blowing. My camera and lens are on a tripod, and I just let the wind blow and just took some shots. And a close-up. And you can see the movement. I mean, it was just really nice, and it was just about 1/8 of a second. So, and on a tripod, anything, if you're on a tripod, anything that's not moving is gonna, appear a little sharp, pretty sharp. Grasses, same thing, the wind is blowing on a tripod, just letting, just clicking away, letting the wind do all the work for me. So, I didn't have this information when I was first starting out. I was sitting there saying, well, how are they getting that look? Who's, and then I would write people, and I wrote somebody, and they said, I've been developing this technique for years. Thank you for your interest. I was like, get over yourself. Tell me what you did. And so I decided I'm going to figure this out. And I first started off with fans. Just never occurred to me to let the wind do it. And using the wind, this I used a polarizer for in Alair State Park. It was a really windy day. I'm going out to shoot blurs. That was my first thought. And having, the foliage turning was another plus. But it's still sunny, so I decided that I would get on a shadier side, use the polarizer, and I was able to get a slow enough shutter speed to just let the wind do the work for me. That's yours.
It's up in Monhegan Island, Maine on a windy afternoon. Bunch of daisies growing in some cottage, and my idea of a macro lens is the 800. And now we're at Bosque. This is Bosque del Apache, and this is from the main impoundment with the 70-200, or maybe even the 24-105, and probably about 1/15 of a second. You see some of the birds relatively sharp, maybe a little bit slower. And not panning with the birds very much. And we'll vary that. We'll take some holding the camera still, and we'll take some when we're panning. So if you look at the mesa, it's relatively sharp. You know that I was letting the birds fly through the frame. That's why there's a decent amount of blur at a 30th. If I had been panning with the birds at a 30th, the birds would all be relatively sharp.
Love this.
We were at, no,
San Diego?
it's in San Diego. I can't remember the park. There are 5 lakes there. It'll come to me in a few minutes. And we're feeding them bread. You're allowed to feed there. They sell you this stuff for the wood ducks. And there's all these coots. And we had like a whole loaf of bread left. And there was all this beautiful golden water. So I said, hey, I'll like wad like a pound of bread together and throw it out. Everybody get it at a slow shutter speed. And we'll get this killer blur with all the golden water. Only when the coots started swimming, that was the end of the golden water. But we did get a little hint of it at the top. And again here, notice I'm even zooming wide enough to get clean on the bottom. So important for my taste. Thank you. This is one that's inspired by an old photograph from my friend Tim Fitzharris. He's done a zillion books. And he's got this one picture of roseate spoonbills at Ding Darling on film. And it was a 30-second exposure. Beautiful photo, and they were preening. So this is, I think, a 20 or a 25-second exposure. And I made it, and I sort of liked it, and I made it about 8 or 9 years ago. And I was never happy with the processing. It just didn't look the way I knew it could look. And then about a year ago, Denise kept twisting my arm. Then she kept twisting harder and harder. And I finally started using Nick. So I went in and I used Color Effects Pro. And I even used Vivesa on this. And I reduced the structure in the background. And I increased the structure on the birds. And all of a sudden, that's why we need to save our raw files, because we may get smarter as time goes by. Yeah, I love that one. Thank you. Then lots of blackbirds in some years at Bosque when they have corn. And again, clean lower edge. Yes, there's a yellow-headed right there. And that one sort of makes the picture. That's why you take a lot. Here's a yellow-headed right in the perfect rule of third spots with his wings going up and down. And he's got the big white wing patches and he's got a yellow head. And here's another yellow-headed here, but not in such a good position.
Yeah,
And
people love to pick them out in these.
There's another yellow-headed, but mostly red wings, nice males. And an even slower shutter speed. And the funny thing is Denise has 2 photographs that'll be coming up that are very similar to these, but they are indeed hers. This is Nickerson Beach. Oh, I love it on the side. That's the color there.
Yeah. Yeah, if you haven't looked at the side.
We were out there in July. No, excuse me, it was September. And this was a big flock. The common tern breeds there, but they were all gone. But then a big flock came from Massachusetts or somewhere, and they were on the beach, and they just kept blasting off. So within minutes, I was yelling out, "Bosque at the beach, Bosque at the beach." Slow shutter speed, backlit with some golden grasses in the background and sort of beautiful peach color. That was near sunset, 10 minutes before. Maybe the sun was down, maybe not. Yes, dear.
Are you panning on these, or are you just letting the camera
On these, I'm panning.
You are panning.
Unless we tell you we're panning with the birds in flight. And here I'm panning slowly with the birds in flight.
Love it.
Is anyone at all ever hear the words clean lower edge? Okay? They don't happen by accident. And again, one of the tips that Denise loves with this stuff is to pick a bottom sensor.
Yeah.
So you can get your focus point close to the birds on the ground. So I'm picking a bottom sensor, and then as the birds are blasting off, I'm zooming out with the 70 to 200, and I'm watching the flock at the bottom to make sure I don't, kill me if I cut the frame here.
This would look nice in my house.
And these are
Yeah.
This one is a common tern. It might seem ridiculous. As a matter of fact, they're pretty much, I'm looking for a Forster's. Here's a Forster's. Here's a Forster's. It's a mixed flock of common and Forster's terns. Now you might be going, oh my God, I wonder what kind of drugs this guy's taking. But this bird, where the heck was I? This bird has a rear cap. You see the black goes onto the top of his head in the crown. That's a mark of a young common tern. And the ones over here, this one particularly has an eye slash. It has a mask. So the rear cap in September, October is young common, and the eye slash can be adult or young Forsters. Hey, this is a repeat.
This is a repeat?
In my show, I have it under 300 F4, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
This was a situation on one of my first trips to Africa using film, and we were at a place called Lake Bogoria, and we got there and there were like a zillion flamingos and they were sitting in the lake, and I'm going like, this is boring. And the next thing you know, the wind picked up, and the next thing you know, there was about a 70-mile-an-hour wind. I actually have pictures where the birds are trying to fly north, but they're physically going backwards. And then it started to hail and pour rain, and everyone ran into the vans, except me. I stayed out there with the 300 F4 and film, and I remember I was drying the front of my lens on my underwear, trying to stay, and it was freezing cold, and I stayed out, and this is when the flock came back down and then blasted off. I made this one. And this has made the finals of a couple of contests, but never won anything. And that's the old standard in film, was a 15th of a second. Thank you. This one, oh, I love it over there, much more accurate colors. This is Blizzard in Blue, and it was actually made about 12 days after Elaine's death in 1994. I went to Bosque. I had been there briefly with her, went back within 2 weeks, and I'm really proud of this one. It was my first BBC honored image. It was runner-up in composition and form in the '98 contest, and it got me a plane ticket to London and lunch with the Queen. Well, lunch anyway. But what I'm most proud of is that on the morning I made this photograph, I counted them. There were 19 photographers sitting in their vehicles because it was too rainy and too cold and too wet. And I said, thank you very much. And the one thing I say at Bosque dell'Apache is, give me any kind of weather. I mean, a monsoon is less than ideal, but I'd even take that over crystal clear blue sky with north winds, which is what you have 80% of the time. So give me clouds, give me rain, give me snow. Oh my God. Die and go to heaven. And that was at a 15th of a second. Fuji Velvia pushed one stop with the old, I'll talk about this lens this afternoon, the 400 5.6, the toy lens. I put that one on the map for bird photography. And this is another one at Bosque that has a special place in my heart. In 2001 or 2, I don't even know, because I didn't even know how to set the date on the digital cameras then.
Do you know how to now?
It's a zoom blur. It's a slight zoom blur at a 10th of a second. But the reason it's so special and important to me and of significance is that I went to Bosque that year with 4 film cameras and my brand new EOS 1D professional digital camera. I was never going to switch to digital, but I figured, well, all my clients are switching to digital. I have to learn what a histogram is. It'll be good for teaching if at least I get a camera. So I went out, and for the first 10 or 12 days, I just used film, and I took a few with digital. And then there was a guy, Vic Steele, and he said, well, why don't you try digital today and just do digital and see how much fun it is. So we went out, and it was an amazing morning. In the space of the first hour, the light changed about 12 times. Spectacular, just different lighting conditions. And this was the first picture I made. And later on, I got to see the shutter speed, 10th of a second. And I was just overcome by digital. How much fun is this? Sharing the pictures, having all the EXIF information there. And I put my film cameras down, and I have those 4 bodies still in the closet in my home, and they still have half exposed rolls of film. So if you're a gambler, you might write me and want to get a hold of one of them. So this was, I call this the morning of my digital epiphany. Thank you. This is the 500 lens at about a 15th, and it illustrates a principle, a real important principle that we were talking about. Obviously, all of the birds were photographed at the same shutter speed because they're all in the same frame. So the birds here are relatively sharp. The next set of birds a little bit closer to us are more blurred, but the birds that are coming towards us are well blurred. So it's showing that relationship between distance and the degree of blurring. And this is a case where my experience, a lot of people go, well, we don't need to go on Artie's IPT at Bosque. It's easy, you just go there and take pictures. This was a morning with the rare south wind and cloudy. And I said, okay, boys and girls, eagle deck, where nobody ever goes. We had all the birds right in front of us, and then bam, they came right to us.
Was that a camera motion or just the birds moving?
This is a slow pan at a 15th. You know, as they take off, I'm looking for my clean lower edge, and then I'm just following the birds. You know, trying to match their speeds. I'm so blessed. I'm blessed to be here. I'm blessed to be breathing. I'm a lover of what is. Canon is amazingly generous.
Oh, you have a question?
That clear edge that you were saying, you can only get that if you're doing the panning, not the shaking.
You can do a shake and still be aware of where the lower edge is. I rarely do any shaking with birds in flight. Once in a while I've done zoom blurs. I don't know if we have one in the show.
No, but if you did a vertical pan blur, you could still get a clean edge. You just would have to
Oh yeah, that's about the timing.
Yeah, it's all about
Whether you're
timing.
going up to low to high or high to low, it's all about the timing of shutter release and the speed of the pan as to how the framing, that's going to affect the framing. So that's where you want to take lots.
Once the birds blast off, you taking continuous as many as you can, or you
Well,
do a special spot?
that always puts a smile on my face. Because you talk about flight photography. So many times I'm out there, oh, there's Arthur Morris. Yeah, we're going to impress him. So there might be a crane coming, and the bird will be like 3 miles away over there. And the guy who's going to impress me is going, and I'm not even thinking of taking a photograph for 5 minutes. And he's holding the thing down. And then the bird is coming into what I call the zone. My shadow is here, so I'm never going to take a picture when he's past there. And pretty much if he's flying this way, I'm going to quit when he's about here. So the bird will come here and he'll be getting half, 2/3 of the frame, and I'll go bam, bam, bam. And then he'll be flying away, and his tail will be the closest thing to me. And this other guy is still going. So he's taking 250 pictures. You know, filling his buffer probably when the optimal time is there. And I've taken 3, and so many times I resist the urge to say to the person, would you trade your 250 for my 3? But I try to be selective. So I'm looking for, on the blurs it's a little different. You really want to hold the hammer down when they first go. And if you've never been to Bosque, when you're there that first morning, and you know, you're hearing some birds, and you're there in the dark. It's pitch dark,
Yeah.
and it's cold. And no,
It's cold.
I've never had below 0 at Bosque. The coldest we had was 1 week at Thanksgiving time, where the warmest temperature on the car thermometers for 1 week was 11, and the low was 6. And when you get a little north wind when it's that, it hurts.
It's more like minus something. But so go back to you're there. You just set the scene.
Oh, so you're there and it's your first morning, and then all of a sudden, somebody will say, here they come, and then you hear this sound like a 747
Yeah.
or a train. You think you're on the train track, and there's this huge roar.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, usually in the pre-dawn glow above that far mesa that we saw before, the sky will just be filled with 10, 15, 20,000 birds, and they're generally coming right at you. So it's definitely a heart-stopping moment.
Yeah.
And then we're trying to vary the shutter speeds and the framing. So here Canon has generously put me on an aeroplane to go speak at the Winter Wings Festival in Klamath, which is on the California-Oregon border. And I get out there and there's a giant snowstorm and I almost die. That's another story for another day. But, so we have snow geese and white-fronted geese, which are the dark ones, and they're blasting off, and I'm shooting with 800, and I'm shooting fast. I think you'll see that picture this afternoon, and I'm shooting slow. And just a beautiful mix of salt and pepper birds with the dark geese and the light geese together, and the slow shutter speed. And the other thing that you're doing, once you get some experience in this, is you're looking at the other elements of the background. You're looking at that mountain on the left and going, man, now's the time I want to get the pictures with that mountain on the left. Much nicer than just a flat horizon, and 100 times better than if that mountain, if there were a mountain in the middle of a horizontal frame, weak. And this is just a total salt and pepper wall of snow geese, and this is at Klamath.
Love it.
And this is one from Bosque that I love from 2 years ago. And the picture was nice. And one thing, we're going for the clean lower edge. Second thing that Denise and I will do regularly is edge cleanup, where we'll use the patch tool, and if we have a bird or two on the frame edge, especially at the top, we'll use a quick mask or the patch tool or whatever and get rid of it. But the thing that made this picture for me, and you can see it better here, is I went into Nick, and there's a certain shade of blue, and I know it when I see it, sort of like your top there. And when I see that, I'll add about a 50% layer of white neutralizer. And it just makes those blues sing into just beautiful ultramarine sky blue. And that's what it did for that picture. I told you we get up early. Here we are in the pre-dawn at Nickerson Beach. That's a 70 to 200. Zooming probably out to 70 with a Mark IV camera. And then some sanderlings messing around with, probably with the long lens, probably about a 15. Nickerson Beach is Lido Beach, Long Island. I'll give you brief logistics there. If you get in the morning before 8, you can just drive in, and they don't hassle you. Except one time we ran into the wrong woman in a uniform, and we were there for like an hour. Well, she called the police, and the police eventually said, well, he's not doing anything wrong, which is what I told her 1 hour ago, but we won't go there. And then it's a pain in the afternoon. If you get there before 5 on weekdays, or before 6 on weekends, they clip you for $30. But if you go at 5 during the week, or 6, excuse me, on the weekends, sometimes if it's cloudy, and we love cloudy, we don't want to be at the beach at 2 o'clock when it's sunny. But if it's cloudy, sometimes we'll just bite the bullet, even with the group, carpool, and everybody will pay the $30. Thank you. Here's a blur at 1,000th of a second. Painted bunting bathing with the 800 and the teleconverter. And they actually move so fast that you're going to get some blur. You even see the blur of the feathers in the head.
How big is that bird?
That bird is about 6 inches long, 5.5, 6 inches long. Beautiful bird.
Is there a time of year you go to Long Beach?
I mean, you can start going in March, and then the only bird there is oystercatcher and some gulls. And then March, even some piping plovers come, but those are difficult because they're little. They don't let you get close. Then April, May, the skimmers are coming. The terns come first before the skimmers. And then June, July, and August are really the primo times.
Usually in April, I'll go there for oystercatchers mating. And you'll see the piping plover and the oystercatchers, and that's about it. And it's pretty cold up there still in April.
Bears aren't real good for blurs. It's hard to get the head sharp. Diving into the water, and do we have, yeah.
That one.
Yeah, okay, there you go. What makes a good blur? You tell me what makes that fourth picture 50 times better than the first three. I mean, that's got water.
Right.
It's got
Impact.
it's got it. Whatever it is, it's got it, and everybody knows it. And the judges in BBC knew it. This was a finalist in BBC. It didn't win a prize, but it's still an honor to get a picture. And to me, the coolest part of this is the standard animal blur, 15th of a second. The coolest part of the picture, anybody going to tell me what this is?
Rotation. We're doing a
No.
shadow.
It's the bear's rump where he was when the shutter opened. That gives you an idea of how fast they go. Here's one, a crappy afternoon in, I don't know if it was, I think it was Kenya. A zillion wildebeest just walking along. So I go to a 1/6 of a second. And what I'm striving to do here, I mean, getting this guy sharp in the front was a miracle, but I was looking to put this in the upper rule of thirds. And then to get the sharp one diagonally opposite, that was just wonderful. Messing around in Africa. Why did these things always have to be running away? That one still works. And that's my favorite, a wildebeest blur. 15th of a second, probably 500 lens.
At the Galapagos, it's getting late in the day. I'm shooting with the 100 to 400. I'm on the beach on my knees, and I've got no shutter speed. So right away I think, okay, let's just stop this. I'm not getting a sharp picture. Let me just go for blurs. So I started looking around, and anybody that was moving, and this guy was just flipping around and having so much fun. I just said, okay. And I got on my knees and just took a few pictures. And this is at a 30th of a second. Click. Grand Teton, I saw this guy, and I had been thinking in my head, I really want one of these. I want a blur. So I begged Artie, pull over. I jumped out. I got a big slide burn on my leg as I took the picture. But just trying to get ahead of it a little bit to get some of the eye. Click.
She was kicking me to get me to stop the car.
Click. And this was from South Georgia. I'm laying down on the beach, elbows dug into the sand, and what I'm trying to do is get the elephant seal sharp, but the water to be blurred. So I took probably 30 shots before I got one that I felt was sharp enough, because again, I'm down on the ground with my elbows, and it was pretty cold. So I was maybe shaking a little from the cold. But I like the way that came out. Yes, sir?
What shutter speed did you use sometimes?
Well, I experimented a lot. I used between an 1/8 of a second and a 30th of a second, so it would be in that range. I don't know which one exactly that one is.
The seal was moving.
No, the elephant seal was moving, but not very much. There were times when he would turn and just stop, you know, kind of like a bird when they're looking at you and they just stop. That's what he was doing. So
He was mostly laying there like a Playboy model, letting the waves wash over him.
yeah, he really was. But you know, he did move a few times. So some of the shots were showing motion blur on him, but I did capture him. And the red eye, the little bit of red in the eye was really important to me. So that was one of the other goals that I had. Bosque del Apache, 24105, and this illustrates how the snow geese are, you know, flying differently than the blackbirds, so it kind of adds a different look to the blur. Click. And 24105. To me, it's important sometimes to show the habitat, the background, the environment. And this, I like, the string of geese went through the group. So the blackbirds were just one big ball. The snow geese went through them, and it kind of looks like a heart, so I like that. And you can see the rest of them in the back there. And this is late in the evening here in Bosque, and those colors are just gorgeous. But again, when do you push the shutter? Well, I'm waiting for separation. The birds were sometimes on top of each other, overlap, and you try to avoid that. So, I mean, I actually only took a couple of shots, but I waited, and I was, you know, trying for this shot for a while, so it's hard to get that separation sometimes. Blackbirds, I think Artie and I were probably standing close together when we took this with the 500mm lens, probably the 1.4 even on there. Next. And going for even a slower shutter speed. And you know, you had the cornfields behind you, so that color was there already. And then the red, I just love the red. Whenever you can capture the red. Sometimes when they're flying one direction, you don't get much red, but when they fly, you do. And the snow geese blasting off. For me, this is about the light, the colors, you know. It was the image is nothing without the light. So the golden light was just beautiful.
Afternoon?
Mm-hmm.
Sweet.
And here's another different, you know, lighting. Look at the difference of them. You'll see the black and white, like completely different. So, and I like this too. But you can see I pulled my camera upward when they took off, so it must have just been instinct to just follow them. And a very slow shutter speed. So this is more of an abstract to me. This becomes more about the lines, the colors, and I like that too. So I experiment. So what you saw from the other shot was I took one shot because I liked the lighting, and I went for a whole, you know, group, and I, you know, didn't have such a slow shutter speed. But then I went for the abstract look. So I'm changing things around. I'm not doing just the same thing.
I wanted to add something, but I forgot.
Can I have I want the clicker.
I know what I wanted to say. When you start getting to really slow shutter speeds, your percentage of keepers go way down.
Yeah.
But you have a chance to create something really different and spectacular.
Yeah, that's true. So at Bosque, now this I used a polarizer for, and this is a 24-105. The reflection in the water was so important to me. You know, this is when it really pays to be with somebody like Artie. He said, let's get the group over by this pond. We're going to be there at the pool, and, you know, the birds are going to come in.
So we go there,
Yeah.
and there's not one bird. But
Yeah.
seeing where the birds had been and asking questions of different people, I said, listen, it's pretty obvious that between 9:41
Yeah.
and 9:58 every day, 25,000 birds go into the crane pools. So let's take a shot. So the first morning we go there, and we get there 9:30, there's not one bird in the pools, and we get out and I go, okay, set up short lenses and medium, intermediate telephoto zooms. And they're looking at me like, what's wrong with him? And then all of a sudden somebody goes, here they come. And we look to the east, and the sky is just, and they came and they just swirled around. Oh my God.
9:59. He was a minute late.
No, the first day they were at 9:41. I think that's
But
this.
for no, this wasn't the first day. I had already planned for this one. So I really like that, and you know, that was, I had already composed it in my head while the birds were flying that I want that reflection, and I want enough of it. I didn't want it to be a tiny strip.
Polarizer?
Yes, I did use a polarizer for that. 24-105, yes. And you know what? I could have fixed that distortion, but I decided not to. I think it added to that whole look, so yes. Yeah, that was my favorite shot too, by the way, from this last trip. I did like this one. We were really lucky. I was photographing some of those trees that you saw earlier with a couple of the people from the group, and all of a sudden we heard, before we even saw, the group of snow geese going up. And I turned really quick and I said, oh my God, you know, so I started yelling out my settings because I didn't, you know, I didn't know if they would be lost where they were with their cameras. And I was still on manual focus, so I was manually focusing all these. I didn't have time to do anything, I was just turned. But it ended up that we were given opportunity after opportunity. They must have lifted off, what, 20 times during that whole afternoon. They went down, they went up, and apparently a golden eagle had, we didn't know this, but the naturalist that was with us said that a golden eagle had come in to scare them up so that he could find a weak one. Never did, left, but got them, you know, in a tizzy, so we
The
were really
birds
lucky.
this year were very spread out because they only had one cornfield by the road, and they had already knocked the corn down well back, and they had a lot of fields with alfalfa and soy. So the birds were spread out, and then just think it was the last morning of the IPT, the instructional photo tour. We had a big bunch of birds, and we were actually thinking of going to the pond where all the birds go. But when it got to be just before 9:30, more and more birds were flying into the cornfield. And then we saw this huge blast off from the back, from the north. We said, oh my God, if they're going to go to the pond, we're too late. Instead, they all flew to the cornfield. So when they landed, there was this seething mass of about 25,000 birds. And they said, we can't leave, they're going to go. So about 5 minutes later, they all blasted off, and they flew around in circles in front of us, and then they went to the alfalfa field and landed for 1 minute, at which point the golden eagle came from the left, and they all took off and flew around in front of us again for 5 minutes. So it was like...
And this, the coyote, actually in, not this frame, but a couple of frames later, he's right here, but he's half out of the frame, so I didn't keep that one. I was, oh, I just, you know, sometimes you look at these pictures and you don't know. I never even saw the coyote until then. We had spotted, I think, 4 in one day, right, just playing around, you know, coming back and forth around the group. So they see that, they know, and it's great. This is in the morning, early morning, and this is, again, another example of experimenting. This one, I backed out a little bit, so I'm using a zoom lens. I was using the 100 to 400, and I just backed out a little bit. So I vary things up. This is, we had a fire in the mist kind of situation, and we were there on a workshop called A Blurry Day in Bosque doing blurs. This was right after the Guide to Pleasing Blurs came out. And so I felt obligated to take a few blurry shots, but I really wanted a few straight shots, so I took both. And I got some really nice, just straight regular shots, but I also did some blurs, and I'm glad I did. Robert Amoruso wrote me a nice letter how much he really loved this, so that really made me feel good. Alaska, it's snowing. I have no shutter speed. I'm not getting any more sharp shots. Go for the blurs, so that's what I did. And I went with the gulls because they were white and the background was dark, so I knew that they would pop. So I worked on those for a while, and I got some really good ones, actually, that I'm happy with anyway. But the snow...
How many were keepers?
Oh, yeah, okay. I probably shot 100, and I probably kept, I think I kept 4.
At least that would not discourage.
No, no, don't be discouraged. That's what I tell everybody, you know, try. It doesn't cost anything, like Artie said. It's a little bit of time, you know, delete, 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 delete. But, you know, when you get a good one, you're so happy.
You know, Denise, this is so beautiful. Did you focus on the body of the bird and pan with the direction of the bird in order to get that?
Well, what I did is I focused on the bird, and I was happy to get my...
And then you just moved it a little bit?
I followed the bird just like I would if I was shooting a regular shot. What I was lucky was that the birds were hovering. So so you get a few seconds. It's not like he's just flying by. He's hovering, so you get a couple of seconds to lock focus on him.
One thing we should have mentioned is that, geez, for the past even 2 decades, these intentionally blurred images, the pleasing ones, the beautiful ones, have done really well in all the big contests, in BBC Wildlife Photographer of the Year and Nature's Best. And these pictures were somewhat inspired by a guy from the UK named Jan
Van der Grief.
Van der Grief,
Yeah.
who had one of these, and this is a true story.
Yeah.
On our instructional photo tours, we ask them to bring 5 or 6 of their best slides to be critiqued for a critiquing session. So this guy, Jan, he brought one of a herring gull, and as soon as it went on the screen, Denise and I both started jumping up and down screaming, "You got to enter that in BBC."
Yeah.
Well, guess what? He was honored in BBC with that exact frame.
Yeah.
But then that served to inspire us too.
But the funny thing is, some of the clients, when we were critiquing, they said, well, would you get rid of that noise? Do you think the noise is a little distracting? And I said, no, it reminds me of an old film slide, and I think it looks fine. And I'm more, I'm just so impressed by the way that if you see the picture, I mean, you have to go and see the picture.
Just for the record book, this guy had polio when he was a kid, and he needed help just to get out and photograph.
Yeah, and amazing. So. But so, some people were thinking that it was thrown in the garbage, and Artie and I saw it, and we were like, oh! and right away I'm thinking, uh-oh, he's better than us, we're in trouble. So we're at the Widgeon Pond if we're, doing different things in Bosque, and just slowing down my shutter and trying to let the water become like a painting. So for me, that's something I like. In Florida, at a Southwest Florida IPT, I have a million of these sharp. So I just, slowed down my shutter a little bit. I didn't move. I tried to stay as still as I could. I was hand holding, and I just wanted to soften it a little. And that was just an experiment, and I really liked the way that came out. More subject movement. This one's mine. This is Lahardy Rapids. And a slow shutter speed. This was with a 500mm lens. And that's Artie's.
And that's with the 800. And
Funny
that's
though, we're both zeroed in on the same spot.
yeah, it's
in the
reflecting the sky in part, and then some fall color on the far bank of the Lahardy Rapids.
Yeah. I love this.
This is the Cave Store Cliffs in San Diego in La Jolla, and I focused by the light of a street light in the dark, and it was a day with huge surf, big breaking waves, and it's an 18-second exposure. And I knew it was a good picture when John Shaw was on the trip as a guest co-leader, and the next morning he was out there in the same spot. Thank you. There you go. You got it. What makes a good blur? This won a prize in Nature's Best 2 years ago. It's inspired by an Andy Rouse photograph of Sally Lightfoot crab in the shade at a slow shutter speed. I happen to think this one's better, but don't tell Andy. 1/6 of a second, lady fell, almost died on one of the Galapagos trips. Turns out, long story, but it turns out she didn't bother to tell us that she had had a serious automobile accident 8 years before and had brain damage, but she didn't tell us. So, it's you or me?
I think that's you.
Oh. Yeah, when we went to Yellowstone, it was fantastic, only there were no bears and no animals. So in this one fall, they just said, we saw a couple of bears in Jackson Hole, a couple of black bears, but the animals were few and far between aside from buffalo. So we spent a lot of time at Lahardy Rapids, and then this was 70 to 200, probably with the polarizer or a 3-stop ND, and then converted to black and white with Nik Silver Effects Pro. There's a couple of presets that I like. I can't remember the names. Slow shutter speed. This is Iceland, the big waterfall. Oh, what a beautiful place. And Niagara Falls at a 1/5 of a second. I love this one. And we have a few minutes. A funny story. There's a guy named Peter Burian. Anybody ever hear of him? He's done a photography book for National Geographic. He was an editor of Shutterbug magazine. So when he saw me walking into the hotel, there was a convention with my 500 lens on a rainy afternoon. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I was out photographing Niagara Falls. I've never been here." He said, "Well, I'm a Canadian. I've lived here my whole life. I've got all the good pictures of the falls." So I said, "Thanks for sharing." So I went back to my room and I worked on the picture. And as I always do, I brought my laptop to dinner, and I opened this picture up and I showed it to Peter, and he looked at it and he said, "Oh my God." So I guess he didn't have all of the pictures.
Sanibel Beach, standing on a jetty, early morning. None of the clients wanted to get out of the car. Oh well.
You got to make them feel bad when they do that.
Yeah. And
to me, these are beautiful. They look like lava.
Yeah, and then just turning my head the other way and seeing things a little bit differently. Letting the water just, move.
Love that one. Is that Blind Pass?
I think that's Lahardy Rapids.
Beautiful.
This is Nickerson Beach. You saw Artie's picture earlier of this early morning, right before the Sanderling. Well, this is just a close-up of the water. So as
it's the same shot without the birds.
Yeah, well. And this is from Bosque. This is the actual water. The sun, the early morning sun is reflecting in the water. So I just went with the 500 millimeter lens. I just did a diagonal pan blur. And then this is the actual sky. So then I decided, well, let me take a picture of the sky so that you could see the colors that. And I just did the pan blur.
Both of those got me really pissed off.
I tried to tell him, but he wasn't listening. Zoom blurs. Okay.
Zoom blurs. My general advice is to be about 1/4 or 1/5 of a second. Now you can go slower or even faster, but for simplicity's sake, I like to be between 1/4 and 1/5, and I like to use a zoom lens, and I like to start at the long end. In other words, zoom in, set my exposure manually, and then zoom wider. And of course, when you're first doing them, you're practicing whether you're using a push-pull or a twist zoom to see the final framing. And again, I'm looking for a clean lower edge, and I'm looking to get all the vegetation in at the top. So as I'm taking 25 of these, I'm checking to see if I need to zoom faster or slower. And the funny part is when you first attempt to make a zoom blur, I can guarantee the first one you take and you push the button and pull the lens, it's going to look like a sharp picture. It takes a little practice to get the timing down.
Question. Where do you set your focus?
I focus, go back. Here I just focused on the two birds in the middle, and the next one,
And you focus on the long end.
focus on the bird at long and then pull to short. Jackson Hole, early morning light, beautiful fall color, 70 to 200 on a tripod. And again, if you go to a slower shutter speed, Denise does them sometimes at a second, and she'll just zoom very slowly. So,
And smooth, very smoothly. Try to keep your movement smooth.
and believe it or not, I'm not even sure, I think this is film. And if it is film, it had to be with the 100 to 400. And it's definitely in Africa, but that's all I can tell you about it.
It's in Africa.
And then, again, this is Tanzania somewhere, early in the morning. We like to get you up early. And two zebra zoom blurs. Yeah, I like this one better with that one animal clearly defined. Next.
Love that.
This is at Salisbury Plain on South Georgia on my 2007 trip with the 100 to 400. Spectacular place. Oh, South Georgia is amazing. A zoom blur at Bosque on a blast off. One time I remember to do it.
Sunflower field, focusing on the sunflower. And this tells you that I did not zoom fast. If you zoom fast, they're going to be streaks and you're not going to see anything. So I went very slow and not very much. And the top is all fog. We had an early morning fog. So this really appealed to me. But
1 second?
No, this is about probably a little bit less than that. And it was on a tripod. So sometimes, being on a tripod, it helps you keep that one in the center.
I love the flower in the middle.
This is in Sparta, New Jersey, where I do my sunflower workshop.
I love the
Why
flower
are
in
you
the
there?
middle. And then I love the flower in the lower right.
Yeah. So this is showing that, a little bit faster of a zoom. And this, I've loosened the tripod collar, so I've done everybody's going like they've tried it. And this
Zoom
is
and a twirl.
hydrangeas, so.
Is that a zoom too?
Yes, I'm zooming also. And that one already did.
This is Lupin's in Iceland, where I borrowed my friend Lou Newman's 100 to 400, and I did a twist zoom blur. I'm not quite sure if I could do it this well again, but it worked that day.
Multiple exposures. I'm using the 5D Mark III for this. And this is from the same sunflower field. And I've done a soft sharp. And it's a technique that I'll go over. So, starting off with this one. You see, I don't have my laser, but you see the little imperfection there?
Yeah.
That's there for a reason. I tried to find a flower with one so you could follow it. So the first one I take a relatively sharp image. The second one I defocus. So I've set my camera to however many exposures. I'm going to do 4 or 5. The second one I'm doing is defocused, and that's going to add a little bit of color. The third one, I've moved my camera. Now you see that spot's up a little bit. The fourth one, I've moved it back. And then this is what it looks like. This is what the camera has produced. And then in Photoshop, I reveal the very first center of the one flower and give it a slight crop. So really easy to do. I have a tutorial on this, and it's just real easy. And here's just a multiple exposure of like maybe 8 shots put together, and I use the bicolor filter in Nick Color Effects. And this is from a dahlia
She
farm.
says she doesn't like this one that much. And I just think it's like a painting. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and I just
Maybe that reaction will change your mind.
Well, I just did a random, 5 images, and the camera just puts them all together. So this is my soft sharp with a twist. So what I do is I take one sharp picture, then I zoomed in really close on just the red. I got really close into the red, and I defocused it. So now my second shot is all filled up with red. And then I go and I turn my camera just a little bit so that now I've got a turned one. So that now combined, I've got one with a punch of pink, which I liked. This is using 2 images, one soft and one sharp, but the soft one is all backlit, so that backlighting really makes it look like an Orton effect in camera. And here's a sunflower, and I'm just turning the camera, little movements. And I'm not worried about the center. Is the center going to be completely tack sharp? People would say, oh, would you use that really right stuff thing? No, it's a blur. It's supposed to be pleasing. It's supposed to be soft and romantic. I'm not looking for tack sharp on my regular flower images. I'm not going to do that now. So same principle. This is just shot against the white sky and doing the same movement, moving my camera a little bit. And one of the things I like to do is one straight head on, one turn to the right, and then one turn to the left. Gives it a nice balance. Yes?
Okay, I don't have a camera that will do this in camera.
Okay.
So will I stack it? What would I do?
Yeah, in Photoshop,
Yeah.
you'll stack your layers, and you can lower the opacity and turn each one. Okay, and then you can create an action. That's what I used to do. You create an action so that when you bring a flower in, you just hit that one action, and it does it all for you. Yeah. So. And this is a dahlia, and the lines were just beautiful, and it was so delicate. I loved it. And I just did 3 images, and again, straight on, turn just slightly to the right and then slightly to the left, and it blended them together. And so this is a dahlia that is shot against a black table. And I was giving a workshop and showing different demonstrations, so this one really worked out nicely. So I like the way that looked. And so for this one, I'm focusing on that one flower, and I'm turning in the same direction for them. And so that kind of gives you an idea that you can, make one thing stand out in the frame if you'd like. And Japanese wisteria at Longwood Gardens, I just love the softness and the light for that one. And forget-me-nots. This is actually 5 images with the 100 macro, and I just filled the frame, and I was just careful in each spot that I shot of the patch that I made sure I filled the frame with flowers. And then I didn't turn it, I just took separate shots, and then the camera put them all together like they were, a bunch of them, and they were really not that full. So this is 7 images, and we had, again, at the sunflower field, we had a lot of the fog. So this gave it an ethereal kind of look with the fog. And then this one is later in the day with 9 images. And the field this year was a little empty.
Thin.
Yeah, it was a little thin. The year before it was beautiful. I mean, they just didn't have a great crop this year. It was nice enough to do a workshop, and we had plenty of flowers, but I just wanted to fill it in so it looked like there were tons of them. And this is at Lonaconing Silk Mill. In the summertime, the leaves go on the windows, grow up against the windows. So I did 2 image multiple exposure just to move the one group of window panes over a little bit, so it kind of looked like they were stacked on top of each other. And the windows are all broken at Lonaconing, and that's one of the things that we love there, all those broken windows. But so I just did 2 images, and the camera stacked them, so it kind of gave it a nice look. This is the Manhattan skyline, and you can tell how many Empire State Buildings there are. So you know how many I took. And Artie was saying earlier that, you know, you're always sharply focusing. Well, I like to defocus also. I've played around with the focusing ring on my camera, on my 100mm macro, and I feel like it helps to create art. It just softens things up, and apparently he did too, because this is his.
Here's a sunrise at Nickerson with probably the 800 and a 1.4 teleconverter. And then I don't know what made me think of it, but the next frame I just turned the focusing ring, and I like that way better than the sharp one.
And so this is an iris at Chanticleer Gardens, and on a tripod, believe it or not. And I was going for a really sharp shot, and then I started, you know, messing around because I'm always manually focusing. And I just saw something. I said, "Ooh, that looks pretty." I took that shot, showed everybody, and all of my clients went and got it. And one of them actually printed it for over his fireplace, a nice big print. He loves it, and I think it's
See the eye in the lower right-hand corner?
right over here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the kind of thing. This becomes abstract more, and it's about the lines and the color. And if you're going for an abstract look, that's really important that you find an image or a subject that has beautiful lines or beautiful color, something. And this lily is just defocused, and it kind of looks like it was painted, and it was really just defocusing your focusing ring. Photoshop blurs, that's a zoom blur in Photoshop, and then this is Artie's.
That's a Bosque sunflower. We did a cleanup volunteer project out there one year. We got out in September, and there's a zillion sunflowers. So this is with the 600 and the 2X. Then I defocused one, and then I put them together.
Did we even know each other then?
Of course not.
No, I don't think so, right? So you did this without, yeah. So that's kind of crazy that we're both on like the same.
It also shows that I'm smarter than I look.
Well, that I know. And that's not saying a lot, so don't say that again.
Oh, this one is cool. This is just thinking on your feet. We had this bear, a young one, sitting on the side of the river, and the little creek was going along nicely. So first I took a bunch of sharp pictures of the bear, of which the upper part here is one, and then I tried going down to 1/4 of a second, figured if the bear stayed exactly still, I could get a sharp one of the bear with the water moving. Alas, the bear never stayed still, so I took one of the 1/4 second waters, brought it in, did a little fancy quick masking work here, and came up with the moving water with the curious bear next. Here's one where it was bright sunny, hello, and I photographed this baby gannet right next to the, in the shade of the rain shelter. And when I brought it into Photoshop, again, sometimes I come up with something and I don't know how the heck I ever figured it out. But all I did was, I think when I was doing the, what's that one?
I don't know where your head is.
In ACR, near the bottom.
Clarity?
The clarity slider. And my hand slipped. And the clarity went to like -30. And it made only the middle of the picture sharp. And they said, oh, I mean, there's 100 other ways to do it, but it worked. Next.
In Photoshop, this is actually 2 different pictures, and I selected both birds, and then I put them together, and then I added a duplicate layer, and I moved that layer, similar to what I was saying, and reduced the opacity. And then I added a touch of fractalius just to give me some defined lines there. And this is in Photoshop, and it's just taking the one daisy and duplicating the layer, lowering the opacity, moving it, and then adding a texture overlay to the whole image.
Oh.
And this is a Photoshop zoom, twirl,
Pinch?
and pinch. So I have to use all 3 of those. He knew. Pinch.
Pinch.
So it's under filter distort. You'll find the twirl and the pinch. And the pinch is similar to like if you ever had a cushion and it has a little button and it's tufted back. That's what it does. So if I make the selection of the tiny little flower and put it on its own layer, and then I make a zoom blur, then I'll twirl the zoom blur, and then I'll pinch, but I'll pinch the top layer, which is just the selection of the flower, which brings it back, and then I can just move it wherever I want on the frame.
Now Denise is very shy, but if you go to her website or even my website, you'll find her Guide to Pleasing Blurs. Excuse me, Guide to Creative Filters and Effects, where she's got like 100 pages with detailed directions on how to do all this stuff. It's amazing.
So then this is the same thing, except for there isn't a twirl, it's just a zoom blur with a pinch for the center. And the sunflower kind of doesn't really look like a sunflower, but it is. And just adding a little bit of zoom blur to this flower on the edges, and then, you know, revealing the center. Easy to do in Photoshop. And for this, I used Photomatics and made a grungy kind of look, and I added a zoom blur. I guess that's it. We're done.
For more information, please visit us online, give us a call, or stop by our New York City Superstore. You can also connect with us on the web.